Okay, good morning. So we are going to be finishing our talk about the book we've been reading this month, which is Parenting. Sorry, I'm looking at it. Parenting the New Teen in the Age of Anxiety. So today we're talking about part 3, which kind of just wraps it all up, and it's called Filling Your Toolbox. So we have some questions that we're going to put out and talk about. So let's get started. Let's reflect on the vibe in our homes. Is it a refuge or a stressor, and why? Yvonne, what is your home like?
Surprisingly, my home is a refuge. I have kind of like this chaotic personality. So when people come over, they always are surprised that my house is clean and organized. I don't know why. It's like a thing. But for me, I get very anxious when things are cluttery, messy, piled up. There's things on the kitchen counter. That's just kind of how I've always been. Like really, like I actually get like physically anxious. Like I just feel like I need like clear, like my mind is like a reflection in my house, like reflected in my house. So I notice that when things get really stressful, things start to get a little messier. So I'm always like keeping that in check. The one thing that I think is kind of not calm is my husband listens to the TV really, really loud. And that also kind of creates anxiety for me. And the kids were like, oh my gosh, turn it down. It's too much. But I think in general, just from like a physical standpoint, it's a refuge. I think mornings are not probably feeling very sanctuary like to my kids. It gets a little chaotic. I could probably do better planning in the morning because it's kind of like, get in the car, let's go, the whole thing. But I think in general, I'm doing okay. Like the vibe is, people sometimes are surprised, like, oh my gosh, you have 3 kids and your house is very quiet.
Yeah, I would say the same, that, I think our home is a refuge, but, we're all homebodies, like all 4 of us. Like we just, probably my husband, the least of us, but myself and my 2 kids, because they're just like me, we enjoy being home. But like there's stuff to like go do. My nightmare is having a busy weekend where I have a bunch of stuff to do and I can't just like sit around my house and enjoy my house. So that is just definitely, because I, like you, I have a very stressful job, and so when I go home, I like it to be calm and peaceful. Which brings us to the next question. You kind of touched on this a little bit. What can we do to create a more calm and peaceful sanctuary? And Yvonne, I'm the same. When like there's like piles and stuff, and stuff's getting like, that's stressful to me. One thing, anybody who's been in my office will notice I tend to have a pretty clean desk, where I don't have a lot of like piles. I mean, the piles I do have are organized. Because that is how, like, it's just stressful to me to have like chaos. Like I look at my secretary's desk and I'm like, oh, I can't even look at it. Ooh, like, don't see, because it just stresses me out. And because when we at home, when my husband and I get really busy, and like the past 6 weeks since we've come back from Christmas has been really insane. Stuff piles up, it's disorganized. And so I told him, like, actually last night I was like, over the February break, we need to clean out the closets and like do kind of a deep spring like cleaning where we get organized again and like get rid of all the piles.
No, totally. And I think we've talked about with teenagers and like, all the things that we've been talking about in the book of like all these stressors that we didn't have when we were younger, all these things that we never even thought they were stressing about the world. And so it's like, there was a chapter about like a quiet mind, or does your kiddo have like time to just have a quiet mind? And so I think of like my kid coming home from school after a long day and dealing with the social and academic pressures, and then coming home and I'm like yelling and screaming to go put your laundry away.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I could probably do better in that regard.
One thing that you made me just think about that I hadn't, I like knew, and we had these discussions, but like putting it in this frame of creating a refuge, after Hannah, my daughter, had gone through like her severe depression. She's depressed like that's always something she's going to deal with. I don't want to make it sound like it's over. She's fine. But when she was coming out of that like really dark place, one thing that she had asked for us to do is to switch her bedroom. And so she and her little brother switched bedrooms. And so this was Christmas a year ago, I think is when we did it. I mean, it was chaos, like moving everything out of Nathan's room and like switching the bedrooms down the hall. But that was like, she wanted to create a new refuge for herself that didn't have like the bad memories of like all the anxiety and everything that she had like, like all those dark thoughts that she had in her old bedroom. And so that was something that really seemed to help her, like creating this new refuge for herself. And she does in her bedroom, she's picked out her curtains. She's got her she keeps plants alive much better than I do. So she's got all her house plants and like, that's where she like, it's lovely.
Yeah, I always like to tell the students, like in my office here, it's like my goal was to make it not look like the rest of the school, to have that refuge. Well, it's not super clean right now, but it doesn't really look like a classroom. It kind of looks more like just a cozy space. And it's amazing how just the energy of something different can help them to start calming down, or same with the garden outside, is just having that space. And so, what can we do to make those changes in our household? And what does your house look like? Is it that yelling energy? Is it, we're definitely going to have to like tell our kids to do things at times, but I think we can do it in a way where like we at least give them a minute. Like I know the last thing I want coming home from work is for everyone to start barking at me like what's for dinner and do this and do that. It's like I just need a half hour.
Yeah, and I think it's important with teenagers, this is something we haven't really ever really talked about this, letting them have their own space in the house as much, and I know that's, easier for some families than others, maybe you're renting and, they may have to share a bedroom with a sibling and, that sort of thing. But as much as possible, like letting them have their own space that they get to decorate, and like they want to paint their walls purple, it's just paint. And so like just letting them have that ownership of space, I think is important for teenagers.
I've always like respected moms that can say like, just close your door so I don't have to look at it. I couldn't do that. Like I was like this, like, oh my gosh, like, and then it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, I'm not living in there. Like, I know I feel better when it's cleaner, but that's something that they're going to have to learn and do for themselves. And, I guess I'm kind of like my mom. Ugh, I hate saying it, but it's true. Like, I can't just like let it go. But I've heard moms say like, I just close the door. I don't care what's going on in there. And I'm like,
yeah,
you do that.
I've never been, oh, my kids, you need to clean your room. I mean, my kids aren't all that messy. Like they just kind of like naturally, especially my daughter, she will clean her room.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just not been something that I've ever.
Were your parents like make your bed in the morning?
They weren't so much make my bed, but I did have to keep my room clean. I mean, it's like, if you were to ask me, like, what is my like number one memory of like growing up, it will be, there's two things. My mom yelling at me to get up in the morning. And she said it in this sing-songy way, time to get up. Like it's like seared into my brain. And like, it's horrifying. Like like seared into my brain. And also her yelling at me to clean my room. And it's just
that's funny how that sticks with you. It's true. It's like I can hear my mom or my dad right now being like, time to get up in the morning. I'm like, just because you're saying it cheerfully doesn't make me less angry. Like
the worst way to wake up.
And then the other one was like my mom like laying down on the horn in the morning when I was running late and I was still in the house. And like the neighbors are like, what is going on over there? That totally sticks in my head. And I don't know that it felt very sanctuary-like that time. So we do the best we can, but I definitely like just thinking of from like, as if they're coming home from a job. Like, what do you need when you come home from work or come home from doing something important? Like, what do you need? And that's probably what they need too.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on. It does take a village to raise our kids. Who is part of your village? How has this benefited your child? And then conversely, if you don't have a village, what obstacles are in the way? Yvonne, do you have a village?
That was a lot of questions that I wrote all together.
Somebody, not me, wrote the question.
One at a time. What was the first question? Do I have a village?
Yes.
Absolutely. When my youngest son was born, he was 6 months old, I went back to school. That's when I actually went to college, and my mom and dad moved in for 8 years.
Oh, wow.
And it was amazing, and I couldn't have done it without them. And my kids still prefer my mom over me, I think. But I couldn't have done it. My in-laws are always available, they're close by. I'm so lucky. Like, I know people didn't have babysitters and that kind of thing, and I've always had that. I've always had that support. I've always had my sisters who also helped with my kids, and they're just a big support for me. And then I have like an amazing group of friends, and a lot of them live in my neighborhood. And if I need milk and I just am not in a good headspace, somebody will bring it.
Yeah.
Like, I have this amazing team of, like, people always ask me, like, how do you do all the things that you do, or work and do all this, and you're going to school now? And it's like, I don't do it by myself.
Right. Right. I too, I mean, my parents live a block away from us and have just always like been, before Nathan started school, like they were my childcare, and they just have been so amazing. And so it's actually been hard, in the past several weeks, my mom's having some pretty severe health issues that, like, oh, my village is not as large. Like, what am I going to do? And I'm lucky in that I do have an adult child, and so that's still living at home. So my daughter has been a huge help, but I like keep like, my mom can't drive anymore, so like both my parents aren't driving. Hannah's going to go away to college in the fall. Like, what am I going to do next year? But one thing, this past week where my mom has been really sick is like, just like the amount of support and friends and like in my network, it's been so helpful to me, which, that other question that we had, like, if you don't have a village, like, how do you, like, what's blocking it? And like, it's been really like, because I tend to be a private person. And so I did this past week in my email to the staff, shared to the entire staff, like, this is what's been going on in my life. And it's been, I kind of want to do, because I had been absent a lot, and I wanted people to know why and what was going on. But people have been so amazing and so supportive. And I think sometimes what we can do to expand our village is just ask, just open up, and like, let ourselves be open to needing that help. And what a great thing to model for our kids, that like, hey, I need this help.
And I'm not naive to think that like everybody's family is their village. Sometimes those aren't your people. That's not what you have. I know there's a lot of people who, their family doesn't even live in the country, and I've never taken for granted having so much family and friends close by, because I've had a lot of friends who don't have that, and who have never gone on a date night with their partner or left their kids alone. I think the obstacle could be, I think one of the questions was, what obstacles get in the way of having that village, of maybe just not having family close by, or not having a good relationship with family, or being an extra private person who doesn't, socialize much. I think a lot of things get in the way, and it doesn't have to be your family, like it could be, for us, it's like our coworkers, it's our friends, it's our neighbors. Maybe you have a good neighborhood. I don't know my neighbors yet, but I feel like I should. I feel like that's always like a good thing to do, because you never know when you'll need each other.
I was thinking about my village growing up, and it was 100% my neighborhood. Like, my grandparents lived maybe like an hour away, but I think there was at least like 5 houses on my block that I would stay at, like after school or anything like that. And I know just how much time my parents put into building those relationships, and they were not always fabulous, neighborhood issues and different people, but just the people around you, and if they have kids the same age, that can be a big help too.
I love that. I think neighbors are fantastic, and I think it's hard to ask for when you need something, like to ask when you need something. But I think about it from like, if my neighbor asked me anything, I'd be on it, right? The only time that we really like came together was when there was fires. We live up in the hills a little bit, and the fires were coming, and like we were all on like a text, and we we're all communicating, and letting each other know what pets we have in case we're not home and all this stuff. And it felt really good and safe. And so just reaching out, and sometimes that's uncomfortable, and asking of like, hey, I just need something. I need somebody to, look after my cat or whatever it is. And I think that's really helpful.
One thing I've been thinking about, I had a parent say to me, you know, one of our Piedmont parents say to me recently, because I saw her, and you know, and she's now the parent of a senior. I've known her for 4 years, and she, you know, I was making a comment like, oh, I have to go and start my Zoom for this meeting. It was a couple weeks ago, and she's like, oh yeah, I haven't like been getting on, you know, I used to when they were in person come all the time. And she's like, it was really great. Like I like from there, like she's like, there's still like a group of 5 of us that like see each other all the time, that we developed this like little like friend network. And I was like, oh, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, like doing these on Zoom, I think they're probably convenient for some parents because they can watch the video later on. There's honestly, I'm not gonna lie, they're more convenient for me to do it like this. But I think next year, fingers crossed that, you know, we can return to in person. I think we will, because that's what's missing.
I loved
like
it.
having that community, like
Uh-huh.
of like, because I think when like the parents are like together in a room, that yeah, you have those conversations. You see the same people every week, and I think that that's a really great thing.
Like high school is much harder to build that community because there's not like volunteer in the classroom to cut up crafts or whatever it is, or you know, and so we don't have that. And so I think the time where parents can connect, I think that's something that everybody would want to do. It was nice to just like have a time where it's like not about, I mean, it's about our kids indirectly, but it's about us and parenting, and you know, I hope next year works out. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. So hey, parents, something to look forward to in the future. Okay. So let's talk about challenges. Challenges build resiliency. Have you removed any obstacles or challenges for your child? What lessons could this have taken away from them?
Snowplow.
The book that we actually read last year was what's it called? Like how to let your child fail, or
failure, I think.
The gift of failure. That's what it was. And that is a topic that, you know, it mapped out all the rest of the stuff that we're going to talk about this year. And that's one that we'll come back to, this idea of letting your kid fail, and how do you do that in still a supportive way, but so that you do teach them that resiliency. Because I think that, you know, it's hard. You don't want your kid to suffer. You know, you don't want them to, whether it's a teacher that you think is being unfair, or something wasn't clear, or it's a friend group that, you know, your kid is now ostracized because something happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult as a parent to let that happen. And you want to put up the roadblocks and protect them at all costs. But I think that does our kids a disservice.
It's so easy to talk about, but in practice, it's like so difficult. Like just the other day, I told my son, I'm like, your baseball stuff is in the car. I'm leaving work early. Make sure you get it out. And of course, 3:00 rolls around and I leave because I have things I need to do. And he's texting me like hysterically, like, where's my stuff? Where's the car? I said, I told you I had to leave. And he's like, oh my gosh, it's tryouts, this and that. So what did mother do? Left a meeting, drove back and gave him his backpack. So today he forgot something at home and asked me to go back. And that's like the expectation that I set. And then all of a sudden I said no. And so I've been very inconsistent with that. Mm-hmm. So my kids are like, I don't know if she's serious or not, because she's not really committing to that idea of not being helpful. But I think he did miss out on the lesson of like, man, I'm not going to forget next time because I missed out on tryouts. But then mom is like, oh my gosh, he loves baseball. And if he doesn't make the team, and it's going to be all my fault, and it's going to, so it's that idea of that snowplow parent of like, I see an obstacle and I'm going to get it out of the way so that my kid can just smoothly sail. But then when real life happens, he's not prepared for disappointment.
Yeah. I think I tend to probably be this is one area that I think I'm a little bit better at this than my husband is. He tends to my husband is, you'd like your love languages. His is acts of service. And so that's just the way he is. And, God love him for it. I mean, and I take advantage of it all the time when it's directed to me. But for our kids, my daughter, she's in community college. She's taking this English class, and her professor is like completely unreasonable and probably a Nazi. I don't say that lightly, but it's just like there's been some alarming ooh. And my husband is just beside himself. He wants to like write the letter like to the community college provost. And I'm like, whoa, she's an adult.
Yeah.
Don't, like she's in college now.
Yeah.
She's got to deal with this. You can't, and you just gotta let them fight their battles. And that was a lesson that I had taught my daughter early on. Well, it's actually, I just distinctly remember that she still talks about this in the 7th grade, where she, with her social studies class, was not understanding the assignment and she never talked to the teacher. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to set up a meeting with the teacher. And we had this meeting and she was like, oh, that was so awful. She was so embarrassed. And so from then on, anytime she was struggling in school or, I was like, well, you got to talk to your teacher. If you don't talk to your teacher, I'll set up a meeting. She's like, oh my God, don't do that. I will talk to the teacher. And so, that's because that's what you want your kids to do. You want your kids to deal with their issues themselves first. Sometimes as parents, we do have to step in. I mean, it's not always successful when your kid does that. And so that's when they're teenagers, you want to teach them that so that they do build up that resiliency, but ideally they solve their problems for themselves.
Yeah, that was a hard one. When I first started this job, I had the tendency to do everything for the kids. Like, oh, your teacher, you need to talk to them. I'll call them. And then my supervisor at the time, she was like, you haven't taught them anything. Like, you do everything for them. So now instead of having 3 kids, you have 1,000 kids. And then when they go off to college and they have to navigate all this stuff, they're not ready. And so that's something that I really picked up of kids have to advocate for themselves. And sometimes you need to step in and sometimes they've tried and it doesn't work. But, all these lessons that I've probably taken away from a lot of people about survival and getting through and navigating difficult situations is something now that I just try to embed in my practice of okay, we're talking about your situation, but we're also teaching you how to do things by yourself.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So this part of the book kind of cracked me up a little bit. I felt like he was getting a little judgy again. The author admits to being biased about not having earbuds in during homework. Can your child do work without listening to music? Can you? And so this is just like in the last section, I do feel and overall, I very much enjoyed this book. I do feel like he gets a little preachy sometimes. And this was one of those areas where he got a little preachy. But then I thought about, and I know I just saw a meme about this on Instagram where, you have to turn down the music in your car when you're lost. Yeah. And so it's the same thing, when you really have to concentrate on something, then having music or having sound on can be really, really distracting. Yep. I find with myself and my own work, if I'm doing something that's a little bit tedious that I don't have to think that much about, having music on, or maybe I'm listening to a podcast or something like that, is really great and I really enjoy it. But if it's something I have to concentrate on, I can't have any sort of sound.
Yeah, I agreed. That was my first instinct. Same when I read it, I'm like, he's so old school. Who's this guy? Of course you can do this. And then I was doing case notes and I always do case notes every night, every session that I had. And I was able to do that. But then I was working on a homework assignment where it was I had to reflect on a lot of stuff and analyze some things. And I was like, I can't, I had to take it out and really focus and really bring up stuff. And it was oh, maybe I can't. and I know for some kids it is relaxing and whatever, but I think obviously not during lecture time and that there's some kids who have accommodations where they can put an earbud in, but not during instruction time, but during when they're just working freely. I think that could be it. But yeah, I don't know anybody that works better on those more tedious tasks. Kayla, are you a music listener?
Yeah. I was going to say, this is something that I think I disagree with just for myself, but I also have ADHD. So I think having that I can't listen to anything with lyrics in it, but if it's silent, I can't focus. So I'll need some kind of low, usually just instrumental music to it kind of grounds me in place to stay focused.
I like
Yeah,
that.
I find I do better with just music. I mean, even something with lyrics in, I usually am fine with, because I'm not really paying attention to the lyrics. I cannot, like a podcast or something like that. I can't listen to a podcast and work at the same time.
Yeah, that's not easy.
Mhm.
So I don't know. That makes sense without the lyrics, but yeah, I don't know like how many of our kiddos are, not only are they listening to music, but like my kid, I walk in, he's like watching YouTube and doing math at the same time. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm just, and I'm like, well, no wonder you got a C- on your last.
And I guess I think it just depends, like, is it work that they have to really concentrate on? Or is it something like, I could see some kids that, math is not as difficult and they just like are plugging in and doing, like, they know how to do it. And so it's just easier to do.
Yeah, that's not my
Um,
kid.
That exactly. So that's going to vary on the kid, but I'm, because I'm thinking of like maybe doing like an art project or something like that. That yeah, you could listen to music, but maybe some kids can't because they really need to like concentrate. And so I think that this is one of those areas where you have to really like have a real conversation with your kid, and is it actually distracting or is it not? And when, like, sometimes it might be distracting and sometimes it might be okay.
Yeah. It kind of gets me thinking about like as a parent, like how many people are really like dictating what happens in the space where your kiddo's doing homework, right? I don't think that works, like, to go in there and be like, turn that off and do this and do that. But I would wonder, like, what are the rules that people have established? When my kids were little, I would make them come to like the dining table to work where I was there watching them while I cooked dinner or whatever. But like, what are the restrictions that parents have put into place for their kids' homework time, or have you? Just
Yeah.
something to think about.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm like, just get it done wherever you do it, however you do it. Just do it.
Some nights it's definitely that. Okay, so let's talk about money. And so this was an interesting part of the book. Do you feel your children know the value of money? Have you taught them about it? What ownership can we take over this lack of understanding? I don't feel like I've taught my kids about money at all, because I feel like I am still learning myself. I'm terrible with money. That is not, my husband and I are going to be working until we're 95 years old because we're not good about saving money. I have noticed that, my daughter, since she started working, she's always been fairly responsible. But definitely, because he makes a point in the book that, when a kid like has their own money, they tend to like learn more about it. And I would definitely say that's true. My son is still 12. He has not worked yet. And
Yeah.
I will always, my daughter is the one that said this when she was like 3. She wanted some toy and I was like, Hannah, we don't have enough money for that. And she said to me, it was my favorite thing ever that she said, we need to buy more money then. That's not how it works.
Don't really know. I was looking at like some Facebook memories, and there was a time where my kiddo said, like, I'm like, we can't buy that right now. We don't have the money. And he said, well, that commercial said you can get a cash advance. And he was literally like 6 years old. And then he's like, can't we just get a cash advance? I'm like, oh my gosh, you have no idea. But money is one of those topics where I feel like the way we model our money management is so important. And my husband and I came from 2 very different situations. Our backgrounds very similar. Like our dads were like, they worked in like manual labor and, didn't have a ton of money. My dad would sacrifice everything to give me $20 to go to Great America, like just hand it to me. My husband had to get a job when he was 15 and a half, paid for everything, paid for prom, paid for this, paid for that, paid for everything. And his work ethic and just the way he manages money is so different that like I often wonder, like, ooh, if I didn't marry him, like where would I be right now and how much money would I have? Probably none. Because I'm just kind of frivolous with stuff, and it's like, oh, there's always a $20 bill coming from dad. That was like always my mentality. And so in parenting, that's been kind of a stressor for us, because I'm like, my kid's like, I need this, and I'm like, here, I love him, I want him to have more than what I had growing up. And my husband is like, whoa, and so I don't know that, we've done like the allowance thing, and, we have, I think I've shared this before, the app Greenlight, where you can like give money to your kids and they can manage it. And so when they put it in their savings account on the Greenlight app, if they save it for 6 months, then we contribute some interest to it. Right. And so they're learning like about saving and doing these things. But really like how we model that, it's like they know which parent to go to when they need something. They know it's me. Right. And I don't know that I've been the best model for how to manage money. My oldest son starts his job for the first job ever on Sunday. And I have a feeling he's going to be much more like my husband, but just going off to college and realizing like every day he's like, Mom, can you send me this? Can you send me that? And he's like, I didn't realize how expensive life is. And I'm like, dude, you're not even buying toilet paper right now or paying for electricity. Like we're paying for your dorm and you're stressing out, right? So I don't think they know the value of $1, but I think some of that just is going to naturally happen as they get older and go off to college and move on, I'll never forget like moving in, my husband and I, we got married, we moved out, we had never lived alone. And I was like, literally like, oh my gosh, I have to pay for lights. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, my mom used to be running around the house screaming like, turn the lights off, turn the lights off, turn the lights off. And it's like, it makes so much sense now. So I think part of that will just come with life and experience, but I'm sure there's things I could have done better to protect.
What I liked about this part of the book was, the analogy he gave, and he shared a little story about this dad that gave this presentation to, which kind of cracked me up. I'm thinking of this dad making like a PowerPoint about the family finances, but like it backfired because the dad had turned it into this like lecture where he's like, kind of ugly about it and like yelling at the kid, like, you cost me this much, blah, 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 and like kind of putting a lot of like the guilt on the child on like how expensive children are. And the author, relates this back to that emotional bank account, and so this is one of those things that, it's important to talk to your kids about money and, sharing finances and what are struggles and what aren't struggles. It's an important lesson, but it's also something that you like don't want to bring your own stress about money to your kids, right? So you want to be able to do this in a way that is not making the kid feel bad.
Yeah, because they do pick up on that like stress about money. I know my middle son, he was just like always worried about money and finances, and I'm like, well, how much of what we were talking about was he hearing, and how has that impacted his ability to like feel like he can buy things? Like he has a lot of anxiety related to money. The idea of the emotional bank account has kind of been my favorite thing through this book. And I don't even know, this is just a silly thing, but I was telling my husband about it. And then on Sunday morning, he's like, do you think we can pick up the house or whatever? And I'm like, I can't do anything right now because my emotional bank account is empty because of you or something like that. And he's like, oh, that sounds like your real bank account. And then we laughed and we were fine. But I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so true. Like, with the money thing, it's just wasn't my, it's not my gift. But that idea of like emotional bank account, I've had that in my head all week of like, and I've even shared it with a few parents that I'm talking to just, about their student. I'm like, where are you? What does the bank account look like right now? How negative are you? Like, are we filing bankruptcy negative, or, are we just a little bit in the hole? And really trying to do that with especially my youngest, of just like, I feel like I nag him all the time. And it's like, how much have I actually contributed to his account during the school week? Not a whole lot. So that's been like a focus for me through reading this, of like, just that awareness of like, man, I need to do better.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say, and that actually is our next question, like, what do we take away from this book? And I think the idea of the emotional bank account is probably my biggest takeaway. It just really, I just really liked the framing of that, and just the reminder of, don't always nag your kids, and like, you're not always like needing to like, hey, you need this, you need to do this, are you doing your homework, have you done your chores? But talking to them and encouraging them and praising them about just their life, like last night. And I was thinking about this last night when I got home, and my son, I think I've mentioned, is an artist, and there's drawings everywhere. I mean, like just everywhere. And so I was like, Nathan, I really like this drawing, like, the details you put in here. And he's like, okay, thanks. You could like tell, like he was like also like kind of pleased, you know? So
Oh, I was like, whether they like to admit it or not, they like to be validated by their parents. And it's funny how like when you acknowledge it, how more of those like positive behaviors start to happen. Like I go to school on Tuesday nights, and last Tuesday I was like, oh my gosh, I'm hungry. I got to sign on for school and blah, blah, blah. And my youngest went in the kitchen, made a smoothie and brought me one. And so I was like, Gavin, you were like the most thoughtful kid that I have. Like, I just adore you and blah, blah, blah. And so then last night I'm like, I'm starting school. Oh, you know, you guys have to be quiet. And he's like, comes in, he's like, is there anything, can you snack or anything? Because I know you just got, like, it was so sweet. And it was like, oh my gosh, like he remembered what I said. That must have made him feel good to the point that he's like, oh, that's something positive and I want to do that again. And just, you know, not just nagging him all the time. It's so hard, right? And then you think about it, it's like you only have a couple hours with them in the evenings. And it's like, how do I want to spend that time? How do I want him to remember me? Like my poor mom, like she's like the sweetest thing in the whole world, but we always bring back like, wow, God, mom was such a nag when we were young. And she feels terrible, right? And I'm like, I don't want that to be how my kids remember their childhood of like mom yelling and screaming all the time. You know, I'm not perfect, but I would like there to be some positive memories. My mom's great, by the way, but she, you know, it was really a lot. You know, and her health suffered because of it. So it, you know, I'm just like trying to
I think
get through.
It is hard because you know you don't want to nag, but at the same time they need to get their homework done and they're not doing it. So
and that's a whole nother balance, right? Of like you still have to be the bad guy sometimes. But the higher their bank account is, the more they're going to be able to receive that.
Yeah.
So I'd say that was my best takeaway from the book. Of just really, it's been in the back of my mind like all week, all month.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so let's, this is our final question today. What do you appreciate about this generation of teenagers? Kayla, why don't you start? You're closest
I
to this
already have
generation.
thoughts. I think one thing the first thing that came to mind was just how much access they have to different knowledge that other generations haven't, and how much energy they put into learning and staying up to date on current things, and how often they are willing to educate each other on certain topics. I think that's something newer just with technology we haven't really seen before, maybe. That's something I really appreciate them and about them, but I'm sure I'll think of more in a minute.
Now, what about you, Yvonne?
Gosh, I think for me, it's just like this awareness about the things going on in the world and the challenges that are out there, and like social justice and like things that I never occurred to me in high school. I was so egocentric. It was like, what am I going to wear? Who do I like? What am I doing? I never was thinking about the planet or other people, or just like, it just wasn't how I was wired at that time. And so I think they just have this like expansive thought process that like I didn't have. And I so appreciate that. Another thing that I really appreciate is their desire to eliminate stigmas about a lot of things, you know, whether it's, you know, their sexual orientation or mental health issues and things like that, like to be brave enough to talk about them in the hopes to help somebody else. Like, again, that's something I never even occurred to me that is a thing. You know, I appreciate that there's so many pressures on them and they're so resilient, and yeah, just getting through being a teenager is difficult, and just watching them do that and grow through it for me is like a really big gift in my work. Like I love when kids come back and tell me what they're doing, and remembering like what challenges they had and how they end up using that in their future to be like a contributing member of society. Like for me, that's just stuff that it didn't occur to me when I was their age or even care about.
Yeah.
You know, I'm excited to see like what my own kids do, what the kids here do, and just like very inspiring for me.
Yeah, I agree with both of you and what you've said. I think that this generation of teenagers, they are very aware of what's going on in the world, and they very much want to make the world a better place. They care deeply about that. And it's just, I mean, I think teenagers have like this reputation of like they're self-centered and they just, it's all about them. And I just don't see that in them, though. I mean, I've made my entire career around teenagers and working with teenagers, so it's an age group that I've always enjoyed. Being a parent, it's the teenage years are tough. I mean, they're not easy years, but I like them. It's where you really like get to know your kids, and like you could see the adult that they're going to be, and like you really get to know like how their personality develops. And it's just fascinating to observe as a parent, and just see like, wow, like the stuff that they care about and how they talk about things. And it's just really cool. Like,
Yeah. I catch myself saying all the time, like, gosh, my kids are just so much smarter than I was.
yeah,
Not just smarter, but like more aware, and just like, I mean, the things they learn with like technology so quickly, like it's just, I'm just like the old mom that's like, wow, my kids are really smart and they like can do anything, and they teach me how to use a remote control. Like I love it.
for sure.
Yeah. So
Any parents that are in the audience, you can put it in chat, or if you want to, anything that you appreciate most about this generation of teenagers or your own kids. I admire and learn from them how they can juggle multiple things at a time. And they can bring up and openly talk about subjects I was never able to talk about with my parents, and how they solve distractions in order to focus better at school by themselves. Sometimes she gets stressed, but at the end resolves most of the issues herself. Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that, with our teenagers, if we just let them do it, they can. They are, Yvonne used the word resilient. They are very, very resilient. And they do have these stressful lives. And, just like a couple years ago, we had done a shadow day where we, staff members like went to classes with the kids and, acted like a teenager, and, pretended like they were in high school, and all like one thing that every staff member who did this said was like, God, they bounce from subject to subject, and like they're like, I'm exhausted. I don't know how they do this.
that was the most exhausting day of my career, honestly.
And like they just do it, and I see them at lunch, and they are, goofy and happy, and just, yeah.
Man, that class after lunch period, was brutal. I think I had an English class that day, and my student was just like taking notes, and I was like, you cannot fall asleep, Yvonne. You cannot fall asleep right now. It is brutal. They are strong. Like listening to music and doing your homework. Yeah. I love it.
So, well, thank you guys, and thank you for joining us in this discussion of this book. I enjoyed it. I was actually on Amazon this morning looking at books for next year, so we'll see. So next week we're not meeting because it's our February break, and I will be sleeping in. So no meeting next week. When we return, it's going to be a heavier topic. We're going to talk about depression, but that is a really important topic for us to discuss. So hopefully all of you join us. Yeah, the emotional bank account, definitely. You guys remember the emotional bank account. That's a great takeaway. Okay.
Awesome.
I'm going to stop recording, and thank you guys.